A great privilege to be presenting here in Perth. I think this is only my second presentation I've made in Perth over all those many, many years. Done lots in Sydney and Brisbane and Melbourne, Darwin and so on and around the world, but this is the second time in Perth. Thanks so very much, Kerry, for the Precious Metals Investment Symposium, and it's good to see so many people here for this last session today. I've been really interested in these Pilbara conglomerates, and when I first sort of heard about them, I guess I had my bit of scepticism and trying to say, well, what the hell does it mean? And because I'd been talking to Novo, Quinton Hinig, about Beaton's Creek, and I just couldn't get excited about Beaton's Creek because it just didn't look right. But when we had the Karratha discoveries, that really put a different complexion on things, and I thought, well, we better look at this thing more closely. Anyway, it got me to think, well, there's got to be something more to this than just that. Sorry, I've just got to work out how to, oh my Lord, press that one. There we are. Yeah, Pilbara conglomerates, fake news or a major new opportunity, and it's my view at this stage that it is a major opportunity, and I was absolutely delighted to hear Quinton Hinig talk this morning about actually having mining starting next year, and that's probably going to be 2 mines. I've been to Purdy's Reward, so I have a little understanding of that, but it's really fabulous to see these outstanding nuggets. I mean, you can get gold fever from just looking at the nuggets, and I had the honour and pleasure of actually going along to Artemis and seeing all that gold and rubbing my hands through it. It's a wonderful, tangible thing. So it is very exciting. Usual disclaimer, I can earn income from trading stocks and from capital raisings. Now, it's really important to think where Quinton Hinig and Novo fit in all this, and they are clearly the thought leaders in what they're doing here. And the precipitation model, which Quinton Hinig and a number of academic geologists have been talking about for the last 5 to 10 years, has had a profound impact and influence in understanding how the Witwatersrand got there. Now, Witwatersrand, 54,000 tonnes of gold production out of a global 180,000 tonnes of recorded production. So understanding that gives us something to try and understand here in the Pilbara. What Novo has done is picked up a very, very large land package, and they're continuing to grow that land package. And you saw the acquisition of that Agena project, which was really quite outstanding. But they understand, well, I think they understand what's out there, and they're continuing to grow their asset base. They're clearly well funded, and one of the things that we haven't really seen in Australia for the last couple of cycles anyway, is exploration companies that do have funds that they can go ahead and carry out their programs without having to worry about going to the market again and finding the share price has fallen in half in anticipation of funds being raised. So they've got the money, that they can focus on that. So they've got a number of things that they've got Comet Well and Purdy's Reward, which is the watermelon seed nuggets. They've had the Beaton Creek, and remember, we've got a resource at Beaton's Creek, and we also heard Quinton today saying that thing is a potential mine just from developing the projects immediately ahead. The acquisition of this Agena thing took me by surprise, but talking about it just made so much sense. Now, in terms of being a thought leader, the sampling procedures that they're using, they've had to develop, and you can see it's taken a long time to get these samples treated and all the issues that they've had with that. And they look as if they're going to be mining by the end of next year, which is very, very exciting indeed. So, the characteristic of these nuggets make us think. What do they mean? Where have they come from? How did they get there? And so on. But what we find is that they're very, very widespread. And you'll see that the strike length is over 500 kilometres east to west. And we find these watermelon seeds. So there's something which is big. It's not just localised. The other thing which is very significant is that these things are high purity, showing they've come from an original source. They're not like orogenic gold, which generally is well under 95%. It has a lot of silver and other impurities there. This has come from a different source. They found in the Witwatersrand that there's a lot of osmium in the material, and I haven't been able to find out yet whether the Pilbara gold has got osmium in it to suggest that it had a similar origin. As they say, if these things are found over 550 kilometres of strike, and the grades in the sampling are remarkably high. We saw that first sample where it was 67 grams, composite of two reasonable sized samples that came in at 67 grams. But we've got Keros, which has had 7 grams, and I think they're going to tell me it's going to be higher than that. And we find all the way along the grades are quite high for what is essentially an open cut alluvial deposit. Now, how easy it will be to get resources, I don't know. But I think it's going to be one of those things where they're going to be mining and finding out the grade after they've mined it. So, where does the gold come from? This is really critical. We've got vast areas, and we've got vast tonnages. We've got vast areas, vast tonnages, and we've got reasonable grade. That says very, very large amounts of gold. I've tried to quantify them, and they're just too crazy. So how do we explain it? First of all, we've got to understand where these things fit in geological time, and this Mesoarchean stage is sort of from about 2,700 million years to about 3,200 million years ago, and that's the time when the Witwatersrand was formed. Now, to get 54,000 tonnes of gold production with some additional reserves and resources, and obviously mineralisation, which might never be mined, we've probably got 100,000 tonnes of contained gold in the Wits. Now, Kalgoorlie with 70 million ounces is 2,500 tonnes. The Yilgarn, or broader Kalgoorlie, 100 million ounces, it's not even 3,000 tonnes. So we've got 100,000 tonnes here, and piddly little things around Kalgoorlie. If we take the whole Yilgarn, we probably don't even get up to 10,000 tonnes of production plus endowment. So how do we get it? So the stuff that Quinton Hinnig's been talking about is having shallow continental seas, very acidic, and the gold has come up through the mantle at some stage, has been eroded, has come into solution into these shallow seas. And as we've seen the start of life in the form of algal, the algae are growing, they give out oxygen, and as the oxygen goes into the primal atmosphere, it ends up changing the pH of the water, and the gold is precipitated. And carbon in pulp, that system. Well, basically the gold is attracted to carbon-based algae and bacteria. So that system allows for it, and then we've got to have some concentration afterwards. I don't understand that. I can't help you with it, but it's a thing that we need to understand, and people have been grappling with what's happening in the Witwatersrand for 100 years, people working on it. I don't think I'm going to be able to give you an easy answer from Sydney. So if we come to the origins of these things, and this was the thing that became really, really interesting for me. we've got to have continental seas, and a lot of you understand that the iron ore formations in the Pilbara, in the Hamersley Basin, have also been precipitated. And I always wondered, how come the iron ore was precipitated into a basin and didn't flow into the Indian Ocean? That's always puzzled me. And why did we just have a basin here, and why should we get so much iron concentration? And consequently, why should we get gold concentrated in one of these basins? Well, the reason for that is, and not flow into the ocean, is that there were no oceans. Now, this is a bit controversial, but it helps for me to understand it. So we get a regional containment, so we get a shallow sea, doesn't need high mountains or hills around it, but we don't have an ocean there. As I said, we've got highly acidic, oxygen-less seas, very, very high level of dissolved gold, and the first plant life provided the oxygen, and then we saw that precipitation with the carbon-rich algae. And this is what this thing looks like. They've been able to look at South Africa, and this is the algae, and here's the gold that's been attracted to the algae. So that it's a mechanism which works, makes a lot of sense, and probably will help us understand where this whole thing is going. So how do we get shallow continental seas? Well, we don't have oceans. This is a bit controversial, but there was a Professor Sam Carey out of the University of Tasmania during the 50s and 60s came up with the idea of the expanding Earth hypothesis. And he basically said if you take all the continents, put them all together, they fit really well if the Earth is half the size. Now, you're going to say you're crazy, and I probably am, but his work has been followed through by a fellow named James Maxlow, and I can certainly recommend that you Google search this, look at the YouTube stuff, and find out the ideas behind it. But what it does, it helps me understand why we've got these conglomerates. So basically, the Archean was only continental crust. We didn't have any oceans in those days, and we had a smaller, a faster rotating, and a lower gravity Earth. Don't ask me to give you all the details, but the empirical evidence is there, and it's really quite fascinating. We might get 3 to 4 high tides a day. The moon was spatially closer. The Earth is expanding at about 22 millimetres a year at the moment, and you can see that the Earth's rotation is actually slowing. So it's affecting our hours in a day and so on. But if we had shallow seas, the moon closer, we would get the high energy environment that gives us these debris type conglomerates. These are really, really unusual. I can't see how else we would have a high energy environment for these conglomerates to exist. So we've got the combination of all this, and this is interesting. None of the oceanic crust is more than 280 million years old. So if we had the Pilbara in the 2,800 million years ago, there were no oceans. And these are the mid-oceanic ridges. We get seafloor spreading, but we don't have any subduction zones. And it's fascinating. I can certainly recommend, as you say, go and look at YouTube and enjoy it. It's fascinating. If we come back to the Witwatersrand and the Kapval Craton and the Pilbara. Now, these are really interesting things. They're the same age, and Archean crust is really rare, and undeformed or relatively undeformed Archean crust is very, very rare, and there's really only the Kapval and the Pilbara which exist anywhere in the world. And because they've been relatively stable, they too have sediment piles immediately above them which are relatively undeformed. This has made them areas of great interest for academic study, not necessarily for gold exploration, but for academic study. So if we look what happened in Witwatersrand, these are the major mines, and they're on sort of fans. Again, I'm not going to get involved I'm just talking about the empirical evidence. You can see where this thing fits together. You can get other people to draw the conclusions, but that's what it amounts. Now, the other thing which is really fascinating is that academic geologists say about 80% of all the gold emplacement in the world took place essentially before 2,700 million years ago. So that, again, means why do we have all this? And why do we have the Witwatersrand with 54,000 tonnes of production, historic production, resources, and then mineralisation, which is not a resource, and then basically we've got daylight. And this is a combination of everything else, the Yilgarn, the Beribian, and other places like that. So we've got to ask, why does this happen? Now, we talked about these things. Why are they so rare? And they've been studied very closely because they're the rocks that have the earliest life. Now, Novo talks about a single continental part with the Cupvale over here, South Africa there, and the Pilbara over there, and that doesn't make sense to me, but that's their view. If these things are cousins, not twins, they've got to be closer together than that. So what we have is, we don't have another Witwatersrand in the Pilbara, but we have gold mineralisation there. We're a lot more boulders and very, very wide distribution. And the Pilbara is much larger than the Wits. The Cupvale is much, much larger than the Pilbara, but the Witwatersrand, which sits on top, is smaller. And we ask the question, with this precipitation model, could the endowment be bigger? My feeling is that it will be, and of course it won't be found in my lifetime, so people won't be able to catch me out on that. A lot of that will be basically just too deep and nothing will happen. So, conglomerates in the Fortescue, we've got remnants of this Fortescue sitting on top of the Pilbara, and that's what we see in the north. We've got the basal Fortescue, we've got the Mount Roe basalt on top, and then the Hardy above that. But in the south, we've got this windowing where sediments have been taken over the top. We're looking at the Fortescue, the Mount Roe, and in that Billowy Dome, and that's really, really interesting. Marindi's doing some fascinating work there. So we've got the Beatons Creek to the east, and Marble Bar and Nullagine, and now this Aegina thing, which is I think really interesting, and it's just surprised me today. And then we need to keep in mind CRA drilled a hole in 1984 that's 65 kilometres to the southeast of Purdy's Reward, and that came up with 1 metre 11 grams in the conglomerates. So it's continuing, 550 kilometres along strike, and we see it in the middle of the basin, and we can see it coming up at the other end. So there's a lot of history at Marble Bar. You can actually, this is the Just in Time and the Alice Queen. You can see that they were talking about conglomerates in 1907, and this was found a very similar time to the Witwatersrand. So if we look at what Novo has put together for us, and Novo, as I said, is a thought leader, and they've done a great job. Quinton Henning's done a great job in putting this all together, but you can see all the deposits of gold, and these are, if you like, this is the remnants that are sitting on top of the Pilbara from the Fortescue, and down in here we've got this windowing with Marindi, and in there was the CRA hole at 1,760 metres. So the conglomerates have layerings on them, and Novo is doing a great job trying to put it all together. Different types of gold nuggets, but it's quite clear it's right throughout this basin. The stuff that Artemis has put out helped us a lot. This is the edge, if you like, of the conglomerates, and it's interesting, from Purdy's Reward to Comet Well, we've got sampling over 8 kilometres, and these are very, very large areas, and they will support quite substantial deposits. Looking at this in a bit more detail, you can see that these remnants exist over a very large area, and the nuggets are found along here. This is a Comet Well for Novo. In terms of the sampling, it really has meant that a whole new industry has to be developed to be able to sample this, and this is why it's taken so long. But this is one of the results where we had the 67 grams come through. There are a whole lot of other samples which have been taken, but we have yet to see the results from those things. Artemis has found more at 47 patch with these sorts of results. Marindi in Billowy Dome, this is getting really very interesting indeed and needs to be watched. This is the stuff that they've just put out recently, more of these nuggets to the south. De Grey, they've got the discussion, and they'll tell you more this afternoon. But again, the gold nuggets, and importantly, we're seeing that the pyrite in the conglomerates, which we see at Beaton's Creek and also see in the Witwatersrand. Keros, it's interesting, their numbers, as I said before, about 7 grams per tonne. And there's a lot of ground that they're working on, and I think they're going to tell us that there's higher numbers than that. Looking at the nuggets they got. So all these companies are showing good grades, and for essentially alluvial mining, these are incredibly high grades if they're able to come up with some tonnes. Historically, Alice Queen, over 100 years ago, 17.3 grams, not large amounts of gold, but nevertheless, it just shows that they were able to get some high grades from unlimited tonnes. So, what's the market saying about all this? Well, it's clearly they're not all that excited about it just now. We've got a number of companies that are involved, and I'm sure we'll see more. But Novo has been quite weak over the last few weeks. They're awaiting their assays, and I guess they're also drawn down in the weak gold market. Paxton, another Canadian company, it's also been weak lately. ARV, Artemis and De Grey have basically been going sideways now for, I guess, the best part of all of 2018. And Keros and Marindi, Keros is about steady and Marindi's a bit weak. So some conclusions here. From as I see it, and certainly what we heard this morning from Quinton Hennig, the understanding of all this is improving. I can see the confidence building up in all the players in terms of the way they're approaching it, the way they're looking at the results. There's a lot of discussion amongst the whole sector. So they're reinforcing their discoveries, they're reinforcing their scientific understanding of all this. The sampling is going to continue, and I think we're going to find that will be accelerating, particularly as Novo gets more of its results out. And with Novo having $60 million in the bank and Kirkland Lake, the big brother, they're not going to worry about cash. They'll be able to start small mining. They've got a mining lease at Gina, which allows them to go ahead, and they should be able to get something to allow things happen at Beaton's Creek and also Comet Well. So these are potentially massive high-grade mines. I know that when I was up on site, in November last year, they were talking about 1 million ounces a year from those operations. That's how confident they were from what they'd seen. And I think it's really only just starting. So, Australian resource sector continues to offer extraordinary opportunities, not just Northern Star. The marketplace is generally underweight these things. We've got many players. I'm so impressed at these conferences when I see the presentations that various people have made, and you realise that technically, scientifically, operationally, and business management cases, they've done an absolutely brilliant job. The Australian geo technicians, the entrepreneurs there, are world-class and absolutely superb players. So exploration potential is clearly not understood from what's happening here in WA and other parts of Australia. This issue, I think, is not properly understood. So I think it's just great opportunity. I do a thing called Dawes Points, which some people get as a newsletter, which I write about once a month, usually talking about the markets. It's done reasonably well in terms of the overall markets, the equity markets, the bond markets, which look very weak. Equity markets look very strong. The gold price has been very, very disappointing. But some of the stocks, like the Northern Stars and so on, have done very, very well. So anyone interested in following me on Twitter or joining up to the newsletter, you can just go online. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And I think the Pilbara gold conglomerates are going to make Western Australia great again in yet another commodity. Thank you.